Good morning. I encourage you to be here next Sunday night for worship and saying we'll see in a little bit to the Cortazios. I'm giving them 3 days for vacation. We'll see them back. When's the last time you had the hiccups? Anybody have them today? They're not fun. Hiccups are not. They're not fun. It's just this involuntary gulp of air, some kind of spasm in our diaphragm. But if you have the hiccups, they probably only lasted you about 30 seconds, or maybe a few minutes at the most. In that, some of you right now, you're thinking about what it feels like to have a hiccup, aren't you? You're feeling it right now. Just try. No, don't try. Can you imagine having the hiccups for 68 continuous years? That was this guy. It happened. True story. A man named Charles Osborne. He had the hiccups nonstop for 68 years. Recorded. They started in his 20s in 1922. And 68 years later, in his mid-90s, they suddenly stopped. In 1990, and he had 1 year before he passed away, hiccup-free. I'm not sure why you're laughing at that, but that's so sad, right? Oh my gosh. To have something that lasts that long, to live with something that's out of sorts for that long. That's kind of the segue that we're going to use today, because we're looking at in this series, Everyday Miracles. We're going through what miracles John recorded in the Gospel of John. 7 of them he recorded. There were much more than that, but he recorded 7 of them. Today is week 3, the third miracle that we see. And this is the miracle of Jesus healing a man who lived with an infirmity for 38 years. For 38 years he struggled until he met Jesus. Here's my question. And I want you to think about today as we launch into this message. Is there something that you've been struggling with for a long time? Is there something that you personally have been struggling with for a long time? It could be something like we're going to talk about today, a physical challenge, an infirmity, something like that. Or someone you love has lived with one for a long time. For others, it might be an addiction. You've struggled with alcohol or with drugs or pornography. Something's had you in its grip, and you've struggled and fought that battle for a long time. For some people, it could be depression, where it's had its grip on you for years, and you've struggled with that. And for others, it might be a struggle in a long-term relationship with a parent or a child or a spouse that has unhealthy patterns, and they've been in there for a long time. Something where we have been stuck. Something where we have not seen the freedom or the recovery that we really long for. So today, I want to look at this miracle here. It's found in John chapter 5 of how Jesus shows up and has this interaction with this man. And what can we learn from how Jesus approaches him, that interaction that he has with him, and from this miracle? So we've got it in John chapter 5, starts with verse 1. It says, "Afterward, Jesus returned to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish holy days. And inside the city, near the sheep gate, was the pool of Bethesda, this with 5 covered porches. Crowds of sick people, blind, lame, or paralyzed, lay on the porches. And one of the men lying there had been sick for 38 years. When Jesus saw him and knew that he had been ill for a long time, he asked him, 'Would you like to get well?' 'I can't, sir,' the sick man said, 'for I have no one to put me into the pool when the water bubbles up. Someone else always gets there ahead of me.' Jesus told him, 'Stand up, pick up your mat, and walk.' Instantly the man was healed. He rolled up his sleeping mat and began walking." So this pool here in Bethesda had become a place of hope, really, for the infirmed, and a place of desperation. It was kind of a legend. It was a legend of the Jews that was mixed, with the Greek culture, ideas around healing centers that were built around these springs of water, and then they would attribute healing powers to them. So you can see that ancient society with not a whole lot of medicinal understanding, that these places would then attract a whole lot of people who would come with hopes. And again, just being desperate, like maybe this works. I don't know, maybe it'll work, and I can be free from this infirmity that I have. So what I want to look at is, what is the everyday application that I can get from this particular miracle? We're going to start with what we just read, and then I'm going to finish the story, and that'll be kind of part 2 of what we're talking about today. So first thing is this, everyday application from this miracle. First thing I see is this: Jesus sees me and knows me. Everybody say, he sees me. He does. And he knows me. He knows me. He sees me and he knows me. It says here, in fact, this has been a common theme of our third miracle now that we've looked at. That he sees. He knows what's going on. He cares. Jesus is very aware of of my situations. We have a God who sees what you're going through. Take this personally. He knows what you're going through. He cares. He cares about that thing that you thought of earlier when I asked the question of what is something that you've been dealing with for a lot of years. He cares about that thing. In the text we read that he saw this man and he knew. He knew something about this man. He knew about his situation. This is who God is as he approaches us. This is in chapter 5. If you read chapter 4, you can read about it later. That's that encounter that he had with that Samaritan woman by the well. I don't know if you're familiar with that passage or not, but he meets this woman at the well, and he has this interaction with her that's gripping. And at one point in the conversation with this woman at the well, he says, hey, go call your husband. And she says, I don't have one. And Jesus says, you're right. You've had 5. And the one that you're with right now is not your husband. And she says, I perceive you are a prophet. And he said, duh. He goes on, and he interacts with her, and she comes to a faith that he would be the Messiah. She, in fact, leaves and goes back to the village, and what she says is, hey, come meet this man who knows everything about me. Jesus sees you, and he knows you, and he cares about the things that you care about. Take that personally today, not just as some big, macro truth, but a micro truth for you. Jesus sees and he cares. He knows. And let me illustrate it this way. You ever get that phone call from somebody just at the right time? You needed it? Or you hear something on a podcast or wherever, you hear something that it's like, oh man, I needed to hear that. That came just perfectly timed. You're in a service like this and there's a song and there's a certain lyric in that song and it just went, oh, I needed to be reminded of that today. A text that came from a friend and said, hey, I'm thinking about you. I just want to do. What is that? That's interact. How does God communicate to us? Through people, primarily. It's the Lord saying, let me have a show of hands. Just curious. You received something like that, whether from a friend or whatever, you saw something and it came just at the right time. You went like, oh man, that's the Lord. That's what he does. He sees you and he knows you. God sees you and he speaks to you, even when you're not realizing it. And he doesn't necessarily get the credit for it. He's interested in those things that we're facing. Here's the next thing we learn from this story. Jesus calls me to action and away from excuses. Everybody say, uh-oh. Here it comes. Jesus asks this man who's at the well, 38 years, he says, would you like to be well? Do you want to be healed? Kind of sounds like a peculiar question. What do you mean, do I want to be healed? He says, do you want to be healed? This man had been debilitated for a long time, and he was probably very used to the condition and couldn't imagine his life being different from this malady, from what he was suffering. He doesn't answer Jesus' question. If you read the text, he doesn't say, of course I do, or sure I do. He doesn't. What he does is he immediately launches into the reasons and excuses he can't get better. I'm not picking on the man because this man is us. This man is us. He says the two primary excuses he uses when Jesus says, do you want to be healed? The first thing he says is, there's no one to help me. This is not in every situation, but this is that way of saying, you know what, nobody's there for me. There's no one to help me. This is placing blame on others for why I'm not walking in healing. Now, I know nobody in this room has ever done anything like that, but this cat did here. The other one, he says, someone else always gets there first. This is the disease of always comparing other people's abilities and advantages to your own. It's not fair. Somebody else always gets there first. We can back them up, can't we? We can back up our excuses or our reasons for why something's not different in our lives. We can back them up. We can bring proof to it. We can support it. But the point is, it's not helping. Because we're not looking at Jesus. We're not looking at this one who has the ability to do anything in our lives. We're looking at why I can't do this in the natural. So to be honest, we also may not have the courage personally and the strength that we need to do the work that is necessary in order to get whole. We just might not. We can wonder if being healed is worth the hard work and the discomfort and the commitment that it will require of me. So instead, I can just stay stuck in a certain pattern instead of being willing to do the work that's going to be necessary for me to get where I need to get. And maybe what Jesus was communicating to him, he is communicating to some of us today. Not in every situation, but in some of our situations. He may be saying, yes, it's going to be hard to get well. In fact, it's going to be a lot harder to get well than to just stay where you're at. It's going to require courage on your part. Remaining stuck does not require courage. It's going to require strength. It takes no effort to keep doing what you've always done. So this is going to require some commitment and strength. It's going to require patience and commitment and practice. Jesus gets you started, but you're going to have to keep choosing to be well. Day after day, hour after hour, minute after minute. It's going to be uncomfortable, unfamiliar, and even scarier at times. Will you do it? The thoughts of it's too hard, the thoughts of I'm scared, the thoughts of it doesn't feel good, acknowledge them, name them, and then let go of them. Call them out. That's what this is this is what I've been holding on to. Here's my fear, here's my unbelief, whatever. Call it, name it, and then get rid of them. They are not going to make you well. That doesn't apply to everything, but there's things in our life that really applies to. This man told Jesus why he couldn't. And Jesus was in the business of telling him and others why he can. Now, I just want to stop again because, if the shoe fits, wear it. If it don't fit, don't wear it, right? But if it fits, wear it. Is there a place in your life, right, where we have been stuck in a certain thing? And if we're just honest, nope, I'm not doing what's necessary to cooperate with the miracle that Jesus may be wanting to do. I've got these reasons. I've got these patterns. I've seen it in myself, right? We've seen it in other people. We want to make sure that we are cooperating with what Jesus wants to do in our lives. And so this man says, I can't do it because of this or because of this. And then look at the response of Jesus. He totally ignores him in what he just said. He doesn't say, really? Well, tell me about that. You can't get yourself down in there, huh? Somebody else always well, that's not. Let's figure out a way to. He ignores what the man says. Write this down in your next fill-in. Jesus' power is applied in connection with my faith. It's not just, again, we keep referring to this as the divine vending machine, right, where he just answers like this. His power is cooperating with my faith. There's some activity, everybody say activity, on my part that I cooperate with what he's wanting to do in my life. The man says here why he can't be made well, and Jesus says, stand up, pick up your mat, and walk. Sorry. He cracks me up, Jesus does. Because we got it rehearsed. We know why I can't, be different, or this can't be different. He's like, do you know who you're talking to? I'm not playing with these things. That's for somebody else to hear, how you tell everybody these things. He goes, I'm telling you, why don't you stand up right now? Stand up, pick up your mat, and walk. We have a part to play. Everybody say, I have a part to play. A part. I'm not a miracle worker. I have a part to play in his restorative work in my life, in his healing in my life. He had a choice, this man. He could either believe him or not. He could try or not. He could have faith or be filled with doubt. He could just stay as he was. But this man here acted on Jesus' word. He acted. He took action on what Jesus said. He had faith, and the result was healing. If you remember last week with the official's son, and Jesus said, go, your son lives. What did he do? He stood on the authority. We talked about this, of what Jesus said, his word. His word is what we stand on. And so when Jesus told this man, he said, hey, stand up, pick up that mat and walk. What did he do? He did what Jesus said to do. And again, we talked about that last week. There's a spoken word where he speaks to your heart, and there's the written word. Jesus comes to us with the same choice today. For whatever it is, belief or unbelief. If we're stuck, if we think our situation cannot change, Jesus wants to stir something in our hearts that will cause us to stand and act in faith. Now, having said that, because that is so essential, there's a part we play in this. Having said that, I need to be clear. You are not still sick just because you don't have enough faith. That's an erroneous teaching that goes around. Your loved one is not sick just because you or they don't have enough faith. That's not it. Jesus' power is applied in connection with my faith, but he chooses who and when that healing word is spoken. So you need to stand in that. It's not, I just need more faith. That's not the case. Not everyone at that pool was healed that day. And that wasn't just because Jesus didn't have enough compassion. No, Jesus came for a bigger purpose than just the healing of our bodies. We see him do that on occasion, but he came for a bigger reason and purpose than the healing of our bodies, and we're going to see that in the second part of this story that we're going to get into right now. So the verse goes on. It's in verse 9. He says, this miracle that happened, it happened on the Sabbath. So the Jewish leaders objected. These people still exist. And they said to the man who was cured, how cool is this? Look what's happened to you, man. This is great. Woo! No. They said to the man who was cured, you can't work on the Sabbath. The law doesn't allow you to carry that sleeping mat. He replied, well, the man who healed me told me, pick up your mat and walk. Who said such a thing as that? They demanded. The man didn't know. Jesus had disappeared in the crowd. But afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and told him, now you are well, so stop sinning. Don't go back to things, or something worse may happen to you. And then the man went and told the Jewish leaders that it was Jesus who had healed him. And so the Jewish leaders, these are the Pharisees, are the religious leaders of that time. They began harassing Jesus for breaking the Sabbath rules. But Jesus replied, my Father is always working, and so am I. Back up. That I inserted that part in the Greek. So the Jewish leaders tried all the harder to find a way to kill him. For he not only broke the Sabbath, he called God his Father, thereby making himself equal with God. So, follow here. This miracle marks the beginning of a murderous opposition that came to Jesus. This is where we see kind of it really started. And John, who is the writer of this, wants us to know that Jesus is opposed right here and ultimately crucified, not because of something that he had done, but because of something he was doing for all of us. This is what John wants us to know. The Jewish leaders were more interested in preserving the law than in loving a person. They had gotten so religious, they'd care less about a miracle that just happened. They were more ticked off because this dude was carrying his mat on the Sabbath. And what do we learn from this? Is this applicable to us? First thing is this: Jesus is not contained by my religious boxes. Jesus is not contained by my religious boxes. Here's what I mean. God gave his people, a few thousand years earlier than this, 10 commandments. Even if you're not a Jesus follower, you've probably heard of that. 10 commandments, right? A top 10 list of do's and don't do's. It's 10. Nailed them down to 10. And he included keep the Sabbath as one of those 10. Have a day of rest and rejuvenation. So he had most of them were don'ts. He said, don't murder, right? So things like don't steal, don't kill, don't listen to disco music, for sure. It's not good for you. So in God's top 10, there's a command to honor the Sabbath. Honor the Sabbath, which is make sure to have a day where you rest and you rejuvenate. He said this is the best way for you to live. It was something that was for us. It was a gift. But the religious leaders at this time, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, they had turned this gift into a burden for people. That's what religion does. So they added their own laws on top of God's laws. Pharisees created over 1,500 additional, what they call fence laws. And fence laws were this, that here's God's law, but we're afraid we got to make sure ain't nobody break that law. Nobody's going to break that law. So we're going to have all these other laws to keep them not even close to breaking that law. And so they added literally over 1,500 extra laws that were these fence laws. They basically saw themselves at this time as the spiritual police. Have you ever met somebody like that? They're not fun to be around. And so when Jesus shows up, he sees these people have been spiritually bullied by these religious police, by these Pharisees, and the people are tired. Here's what, just a side thing, here's what Jesus taught about the Sabbath. First and foremost, he taught this, which is true. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for man, not you for it. Jesus criticized these Pharisees for their hypocrisy, that they had burdened the people with all these heavy regulations while neglecting the weightier issues, which was love, mercy, compassion. They neglected that, and yet they were more worried about making sure don't touch this and don't do that, and you can't have this and don't do, just doing that, controlling people, right? Jesus taught his people to prioritize love and relationship over legalistic rules, emphasizing that the Sabbath should be a time of rest. It was made for you, worship, not a burden of excessive religion or regulations. And Christians can fall into this same religious trap. Every day of the week. I've watched it for years. I used to do this. It's not right. I know entire denominations that, man, they consider themselves the police of spirituality. I can get into conversations with somebody and I can know where they stand within 30 seconds when I'm talking to them about the things of God, where their focus is, what's going on. And you get to a certain part of your life and it's like, how come? How come so many of your friends or so many of you that have experienced this, you're like, no, man, I got burned out on church and, I get tired of being judged and being condemned and being shamed and these things. Is there right or wrong? Is there right and wrong in our Christian faith? Yeah. Is there, and we talk about that, don't we? Okay, we need to put off this stuff. These are things that are not things that we should be clothed in our anger and our jealousies and our wrath and immorality and these things, right? That's a part of it. When we want to put on, though, loving kindness and tender mercies and grace and kindness and compassion, there is a part for obedience. Obedience to, but you don't shame somebody into obedience. Let me try this group over here if they get that. Because then it's just compliance. I'm just complying with you because I don't want you pissed off. Right? Obedience comes from the heart. It's moved. It's the goodness and the faithfulness of God that leads us, and the kindness of God that calls us and leads us to repentance. And it has a greater chance of sticking because we initiate it out of a love for this God. Not just some compliant act. That's why I got a lot of soapboxes I'm stepping on here this morning. But might as well. That's why even in discipleship, in the Christian circles, you say, we can do disciple. I'm going to disciple people. And for a lot of people, that means, I just want you to hold me accountable that I don't screw up, right? Which is just sin management. And that's not what we're called to do with discipleship. It's just to, tell me if you screw up. I mean, that's good. Confess your sins to one another. Pray for each other that you get healed. We want that. But that's not just what it's about. It's about introducing them to Jesus. So we don't want to do that. We have made, even today, extra rules for people to follow. Hear me. You want to create your own spiritual fences to keep you away from certain things? I think that's wise. You got a problem with this? Then, don't wait for that. Set the guardrail here. Don't wait to get there. Right? So if you have to drink alcohol and it's become an addictive part of your life, then don't go to a liquor store to buy your Twinkies. Do you know what I'm saying? Just stay at it. Go to some market that doesn't sell this. So set up your spiritual fences. That's fine. Just don't set them up for other people. Don't set them up for other people. Let them walk with God. Scripture talks about it. It says, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Don't work out somebody else's. Okay? Lucas and Evelyn sang about this morning. This is what the whole song, make room. I'm going to make room for you to do what you want to. So shake up the ground of all my tradition, tear down the walls of all my religion. Why? Because your way is better. Amen? It's true. I don't want just what I've practiced. I want to evaluate it. Where did this come from? Was this God or was this man-made? His way is better. It's freeing. It's freeing. Jesus here, he had not broken God's law about the Sabbath. He broke their additions and their interpretations. They wanted God in their box, and Jesus said, I'm not here to follow your rules or to fit into your box. I'm here to fulfill God's purposes and to see people set free. And that's when he said, so back up. That's when he inserted that part right there. The negative response by Jewish leaders also shows us this, and this is super important. Write this down or fill this in. Jesus uses opposition. This miracle started the major opposition against Jesus. Hear me. But it was part of God's plan. It was part of God's plan. Think about that. God saw the opposition that was coming against his son, and he used it for good. He used it for good. Ultimately, the opposition of these religious men saw Jesus on a cross, but his death on the cross brought us forgiveness and healing. My phone is going off while I'm speaking right now. Whoever thought of Apple Watches? That's what opposition does. Not make your phone ring. God uses opposition. Let's bring it back by having everybody say that. God uses opposition. How many of you love opposition? If we're honest, most of us, we either run away or at least steer away from opposition when we see it coming. And typically, if a Christian faces opposition or resistance, what do? They're blaming it on the devil. They're blaming it on the devil. The devil did that. Devil's after me. Truth is, some of you ain't going to like this. But the truth is, most of our opposition or resistance or trouble we face is not caused by God or the devil. A bunch of it's caused by our own choices. And most of it, it's just circumstance. It's the SOL. It's the stuff of life. It happens in our lives. The lesson that we have to remember is that God works through all kinds of venues to accomplish his will in our lives, including that opposition that you're facing, that resistance, that trouble, that trial, that thing that's coming your way that you wish wasn't there. God uses that to do something in our lives. He didn't make it easier for his own son. He said, I know it's tough, but this very thing is the thing that's going to ultimately accomplish my will for you. All right. That's hard to do when the opposition is coming to say, I'm going to embrace this. This stinks right now. I don't like this, but this is going to work something very beautiful in my life if I'll let God do his will through it. Here's the final thought I want to leave us with about this miracle. Jesus, and this is important, Jesus cares for my body. He does, but he came for my soul. He cares for our bodies, but he came for our souls. Jesus had healed the man physically, but not everyone always gets healed. And we talked about that last week. It doesn't always happen. Remember, the purpose for Christ's first coming was not to temporarily heal our bodies, but was to eternally and forever heal our souls. That's what his purpose was. It wasn't to heal everybody's body. It was to heal everyone's soul, to give his life as a sacrifice for our sin through the death of the cross and restore us to new life now and forever through his resurrection. It's our spiritual, our eternal healing, which is what is most important to Christ. Sometimes that gets accompanied by other miraculous things that happen, like this guy who was healed. Others at the pool weren't. But what you can always be sure of, whether it's for yourself or your family member or your friend, is that he wants to eternally heal the human soul. That's what matters most to him. That's why he came back. One day he's coming back again, and this mortality will put on immortality. That'll happen. A new body, new earth, new heavens, all of this will happen at a second return. But that first time he came 2,000 years ago, he had one thing in mind, the human soul, to see it forever healed. So I want to close right now. I'm going to ask the band to come back up on stage. I'm going to sing an appropriate song for what we're talking about today, but I want to remember for just a second our opening question. Is there something that you've been struggling with for a long time? Remember that opening question. Is there something that you've been struggling with for a long time? Right now, he's saying, I want to work in that. I want to work in that. So I'm going to ask us to bow our heads and think here just for a second, because it could be a sickness, it could be an addiction, an unhealthy relationship. I want us to pray and ask Jesus for healing today. I want to pray and ask for a miracle in someone's life today. A miracle. In mind, body, and soul. God, you are our only hope for a miracle. There's things in our life where we need you. We need you to move in our hearts, in our lives, in our relationships, in my body. We need you. Our eyes are on you. We take our eyes off of everything else, even the whys or how it happened or all of it, and we look to you this morning and say, God, I need you. I need a miracle from you. If you're speaking to me to do something, I say, yes, Lord, but I need a miracle from you today. Would you tell him that? Make this very personal this morning. God, I need a miracle. Some of you, it's like he don't want you to live in that state anymore, or that pain, or that heartache, whatever that is. And you're like, I don't know how to get free. It's okay. He does. He does. Put your gaze on him. Say, Lord, I need a miracle. God, move in my life. Move in this situation. Father, we thank you for that. You still work miracles. I watch them all the time. I say thank you. May faith arise right now, God, in somebody's heart. Faith arise, Lord. And we will give you all the glory. We give you all the glory. Amen. I want us to sing this song. It's called Waymaker. I think you know it, many of you. And hear this. As we do, I want this to be your prayer. You're a waymaker. You're a miracle worker. You're a promise keeper. You're a light in the darkness. Would you stand with me? Let's declare this today as we sing. Make it your prayer.